All Jake wanted was to help a stranded traveler, but when she said he owed her one, this alien took it very literally and very personally. Jake wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag as he looked at the clock on the garage wall. 10:30 at night, and he was finally done fixing Mrs. Peterson's ancient truck. The small town of Cedar Falls didn't have much, but it had enough broken vehicles to keep him busy at Morrison's Auto Repair. He grabbed his jacket and headed for his beat-up pickup truck. The desert road home was empty as usual, nothing but sand and rocks stretching out under the starry sky. Jake had driven this route 1,000 times, and tonight felt like any other night until something bright streaked across the darkness above. At first, he thought it was just a shooting star. People saw them all the time out here away from the city lights. But this one was different. It was bigger, brighter, and moving in a strange zigzag pattern instead of the straight-line meteors usually followed. Jake slowed down and rolled his window down to get a better look. The bright object seemed to be getting closer to the ground, and it was making a weird humming sound that made his teeth ache. Then, with a flash that lit up the entire desert like daylight, it crashed about a mile off the road. Most people would probably keep driving. Most people would think it was none of their business. But Jake had always been the kind of guy who helped when he could. His grandmother used to say he had a hero complex, always bringing home stray dogs and helping neighbors with their problems. He pulled his truck off the road and grabbed the flashlight from his glove box. The desert was quiet except for the distant crackling sound coming from where the object had landed. As he got closer, Jake could see a strange orange glow lighting up a small hill. What he found on the other side of that hill changed everything. It wasn't a meteor or space rock. It was some kind of craft, about the size of a small car but shaped like nothing he'd ever seen. The metal was smooth and silver, with patterns of lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. Parts of it were cracked and sparking, sending little bolts of electricity into the sand. Jake circled around the craft carefully. There was an opening in the side, like a door that had been forced open. Inside, he could see what looked like a seat, but everything was the wrong size and shape for a human. Strange symbols glowed on what might have been a control panel. Then he saw her. She was lying unconscious next to the craft, half buried in sand. At first glance, she looked human, but something was different. Her skin had a pale blue tint like moonlight on snow. Her hair was silver and seemed to shine with its own light. She was wearing some kind of tight-fitting suit that looked more like liquid metal than cloth. Jake checked for a pulse and found one, though it felt different from what he was used to, stronger, slower. She was breathing, but there were cuts on her arms and face, and the strange suit she wore was torn and sparking just like her ship. The craft suddenly made a loud whining noise and all its lights started flashing red. Jake didn't need to be a rocket scientist to know that was probably bad news. He scooped the unconscious woman up in his arms, surprised at how light she felt, and carried her away from the crash site. He had just reached his truck when the craft exploded behind him. Not a big explosion like in the movies, but more like every light bulb in the world had gone off at once. The flash was so bright it left spots in his vision, and when it faded, there was nothing left of the craft except a perfectly round patch of glass where the sand had melted. Jake laid the woman gently in the passenger seat of his truck and drove home as fast as he could. His mind was racing with questions. Where had she come from? What was that ship? Was she even human? And what was he supposed to do now? His trailer sat on 5 acres of desert land he'd inherited from his grandfather. It wasn't much, but it was private. And right now, privacy seemed pretty important. He carried her inside and laid her on his couch, then grabbed his first aid kit from the bathroom. Most of her injuries looked superficial, but the torn parts of her strange suit were still giving off little sparks. Jake carefully cut away the damaged sections with scissors, trying not to look too closely at what was underneath. Whatever this woman was, she deserved some dignity. As he worked, he noticed more differences. Her fingernails had a faint silver color, and there were tiny symbols tattooed along her collarbone that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. Her breathing was so quiet he had to check several times to make sure she was still alive. Jake made some coffee and sat in his kitchen chair, staring at the unconscious woman on his couch. He'd always believed there might be life somewhere else in the universe. It was a big place after all, but he'd never expected it to literally crash land in his backyard. He was still trying to figure out what to do when she opened her eyes. They were the same pale blue as her skin, but they seemed to contain tiny flecks of light like stars reflected in deep water. She sat up slowly, looking around his small trailer with obvious confusion. When her gaze finally settled on Jake, she tilted her head and spoke in perfect English. "You saved me," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that made the words sound almost like a song. "I am in your debt, human. My name is Zara of the Andromedan Collective. I am a research scout and my ship has been destroyed." Jake nearly dropped his coffee mug. "You're really not from around here, are you?" She looked puzzled. "I am from a star system approximately 2 million light-years from your planet. So no, I suppose I'm not from what you would call around here." Despite everything, Jake found himself smiling. "Well, Zara, from wherever, I'm Jake Morrison. And don't worry about being in my debt or whatever. You were hurt, I helped. That's what people do." Zara's expression grew serious. "Among my people, a life debt is sacred. You risked yourself to save me from my ship before it self-destructed. This cannot go unrepaid." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "Really, it's no big deal. You don't owe me anything. Maybe someday you can return the favor, but for now, just focus on getting better." What Jake didn't realize was that his casual words, "You owe me one," would be taken very literally by someone from a culture where debts were binding contracts. And what Zara didn't realize was that Earth customs were very different from the formal protocols of the Andromedan Collective. This simple misunderstanding was about to turn both their worlds upside down. The next morning, Jake woke up wondering if the whole thing had been a crazy dream. But when he shuffled into his living room, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Zara was still there. She sat cross-legged on his couch, staring at his old television with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for scientists studying important discoveries. "Morning," Jake mumbled, heading straight for the coffee maker. "How are you feeling?" Zara turned those strange, starry eyes toward him. "My physical condition has improved significantly overnight. However, I find myself troubled by something you said yesterday evening." Jake poured coffee into his favorite mug, the one with a faded logo from his high school. "What did I say?" "You told me that I owe you one." Zara stood up from the couch with the kind of serious expression people wear when discussing life-changing decisions. "Among my people, this creates what we call a sacred bond. A life debt must be repaid completely before I can contact my fleet for extraction from your planet." Jake nearly dropped his coffee mug. "Zara, that's just something people say around here. It doesn't mean anything serious. Maybe someday you can help me move some furniture or fix my truck when it breaks down." But Zara was already shaking her head with determination. "No, Jake Morrison, you risked your own safety to save mine from certain death. The debt created by this action is significant and cannot be dismissed casually. Until I repay you in a manner equal to your sacrifice, I am bound by the ancient laws of my people to remain here and serve your needs." This definitely wasn't how Jake had planned to start his Tuesday morning. "Look, you really don't need to serve me or repay anything. I helped because it was the right thing to do. That's what decent people do when someone needs help." Zara walked over to his kitchen window and stared out at the endless desert landscape. "But if debts go unrepaid in your society, how do you maintain proper order and honor among your people? How do you ensure that kindness is properly acknowledged?" Jake realized he was dealing with someone whose entire worldview was completely different from his own. "We just help each other out sometimes. People do nice things without expecting anything back. It's called being a good neighbor, or just being human." This concept seemed to puzzle Zara even more than his floating television remote would have puzzled him. "Your species operates on principles that are far more complex than our initial research indicated. But regardless of your local customs, I have my own cultural obligations to follow. I will find an appropriate way to balance this debt between us." Jake had to admit that having an alien houseguest was definitely not on his list of things he'd expected when he woke up yesterday morning. "Okay, fine. If it makes you feel better, you can help around the house with small things. Just don't feel like you have to do anything major." Zara's face brightened with what looked like genuine relief. "Yes, this is acceptable. I will study your domestic requirements and provide assistance that matches your needs." Jake thought this sounded harmless enough. He couldn't have been more wrong. When he returned home from work that evening, his trailer looked like a mad scientist's laboratory had exploded inside it. His old coffee table, which had been brown and scratched that morning, was now bright green and appeared to be growing tiny flowers from its wooden surface. His ancient television had somehow been transformed into something that showed three-dimensional images, floating in the air above the screen. "Zara," Jake called out, afraid of what other surprises might be waiting for him. She appeared from his bedroom looking extremely pleased with herself. "I have successfully improved several of your primitive household devices. Your sleeping platform now automatically adjusts its firmness based on your body temperature and current stress levels." Jake walked into his bedroom and discovered his bed was now hovering 6 inches off the floor while glowing with a soft, warm light. "This is incredible, but maybe next time you should ask before you upgrade my stuff." "Of course. I apologize for not requesting permission first." Zara looked genuinely sorry about the oversight. "I am still learning your social customs. On my home world, improving someone's living environment without being asked is considered one of the highest honors you can show them." "It really is amazing work," Jake said quickly, not wanting to hurt her feelings. "But some of my neighbors tend to be pretty nosy about what goes on around here. If they see furniture floating around, they might start asking questions I can't answer very well." As if his words had somehow summoned trouble, there was a firm knock at his front door. Jake's stomach dropped when he looked through the window and saw Carol standing on his small porch, holding what looked like a covered casserole dish. "Hide," Jake whispered urgently to Zara, pointing toward his bedroom. "Don't let her see you, and try to turn off anything that looks too weird." Zara looked confused by the request but nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Jake quickly threw a blanket over his floating bed and tried to make his flower-growing coffee table look normal by covering it with magazines and an old pizza box. He opened the door to find Carol holding what smelled like her famous tuna casserole. She was an attractive woman with shoulder-length brown hair and a smile that had once made his heart race every time he saw it. These days, that same smile mostly made him nervous. "Hey there, Jake," she said, trying to look past him into the trailer. "I made way too much dinner tonight and thought you might be hungry." "That's really thoughtful of you, Carol, but I'm actually pretty tired tonight." "Long day at the shop, you know how it is." Carol frowned slightly. "Are you feeling okay? You look kind of stressed out. And what's that strange humming sound I keep hearing?" Jake suddenly realized his upgraded television was still making soft electronic noises that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. "Oh, that's just my heater acting up again. Been meaning to get it fixed." "Your heater?" "Jake, it's the middle of summer and 90 degrees outside." Before Jake could come up with a better explanation, Carol pushed past him into the trailer. "I'm worried about you. You've been acting strange lately." She stopped in the middle of his living room and looked around slowly. Despite his quick attempts to hide things, it was obvious something was very different about the place. The air seemed to shimmer slightly around his upgraded devices, and there was a faint smell in the air like the aftermath of a lightning storm. "Jake, what's been going on in here? This whole place feels different somehow." Before Jake could answer, there was a loud crash from his bedroom, followed by what sounded like Zara saying something in a language that definitely didn't come from anywhere on Earth. Carol's eyes grew wide. "Is there someone else here?" "Jake Morrison, do you have a girlfriend you haven't told me about?" "No, that's just the television," Jake said weakly, knowing how ridiculous it sounded. Another crash echoed from the bedroom, this one even louder than the first. "That is definitely not your television, and don't you dare try to lie to me about it." Jake realized his simple, quiet life had just become incredibly complicated. 3 days had passed since Carol's unexpected visit, and Jake was beginning to understand that having an alien roommate was like caring for a very intelligent, very powerful, and very confused pet. Except this pet could accidentally transform his microwave into some kind of matter reorganizer, and kept trying to improve everything she touched with advanced technology he couldn't begin to understand. Zara had been spending her time studying human culture through his internet connection, which Jake was slowly realizing might have been the worst mistake of his entire life. She approached learning about Earth the same way she probably approached studying any new planet, with scientific thoroughness and absolutely no understanding of context or common sense. "I have been conducting extensive research into your species' social customs and cultural practices," she announced one morning over breakfast. Jake had learned to be genuinely afraid whenever she started conversations this way. "Oh yeah? Find out anything interesting?" Zara pulled out a notebook she'd been filling with observations written in her elegant alien script. The symbol seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Your mating rituals and pair bonding ceremonies are far more complex and elaborate than our initial planetary surveys had indicated." Jake choked on his coffee so hard he started coughing. My what now? Reproductive courtship behaviors, Zara clarified, as if using different words somehow made the topic less embarrassing. I have been studying multiple information sources to understand how humans properly express gratitude and repay significant life debts to one another. Zara, please tell me you haven't been looking at strange websites that aren't meant for educational purposes. She looked genuinely confused by his concern. I researched many different sites for thoroughness. Some discussed the importance of flowers and chocolate in human relationships. Others mentioned elaborate courtship displays involving music and dancing. But the most frequently mentioned theme across all sources seemed to be physical intimacy, as the highest possible form of appreciation between humans. Jake felt his face getting hot with embarrassment. Those weren't educational websites, were they? The research materials were quite comprehensive and detailed. I learned about the significance of candlelit dinners, romantic music, and the critical importance of wearing attractive clothing during gratitude ceremonies. Jake buried his face in his hands. Oh no, Zara, you can't believe everything you read on the internet. Most of that stuff isn't real information about how people actually behave. But Zara had apparently already moved on from research to planning, looking satisfied with her conclusions. I have decided that this is the proper method for repaying my life debt to you. Tonight I will prepare the appropriate setting for a human gratitude expression ceremony. That's really not necessary, Jake said quickly, feeling panic rising in his chest. Remember what I told you about helping people just being what we do? You don't need to thank me with whatever you think you need to thank me with. Zara gave him a look that was both patient and absolutely determined. Jake Morrison, you saved my life at risk to your own. In my culture, this cannot go unacknowledged or unrepaid. I have thoroughly studied your customs, and I will honor them in the proper manner. Jake spent his entire workday trying to figure out how to explain to an alien that the internet was possibly the worst possible source for learning about human culture and relationships. By the time he got home that evening, he was dreading what he might find waiting for him. The moment he opened his front door, he knew Zara had been very busy. The usual electric lighting had been replaced by what looked like dozens of small orbs that floated in the air, giving off a soft, pulsing glow that made everything look dreamlike. Music was playing from somewhere, but it wasn't any kind of music he'd ever heard before. It sounded like whale songs mixed with wind chimes, and it made his windows vibrate in their frames. Zara, he called out nervously. I am in the main living area, completing preparations for the gratitude ceremony. Her voice came from around the corner, sounding formal and serious. Jake walked into his living room and stopped completely. Zara had transformed the entire space into something that looked like a cross between an expensive restaurant and the inside of a spaceship. His coffee table was now covered with what might have been candles, except these were made of pure light and floated several inches above the surface. She'd somehow created flowers that definitely weren't from Earth, with petals that shifted through different colors as he watched them, and Zara herself was dressed in what she apparently believed was appropriate ceremonial attire for the occasion. She was wearing his old high school football jersey, which hung down to her knees, and a pair of oven mitts that went all the way up to her elbows. I conducted thorough research into appropriate human ceremonial garments, she said with obvious pride. This jersey displays your tribal markings and personal history, which I believe shows proper respect for your status, and these protective hand coverings appeared to be very important in many of the instructional images I studied. Jake didn't have the heart to tell her those were probably just pictures of people cooking dinner. Zara, this is all very thoughtful, but you really don't need to go through with this. She walked over to him with the same serious, ceremonial expression she'd worn when talking about sacred life debts. Jake Morrison, you have honored me with your sacrifice and courage. Now I will honor you with mine. I am prepared to fulfill the traditional human bonding ritual as described in my research. Before Jake could ask what exactly she meant by that, Zara began pulling his old football jersey up over her head. I have carefully studied the proper sequence of events, she said with complete seriousness. First comes the ceremonial removal of garments, followed by the physical expression of gratitude and appreciation. Are you prepared to receive my offering? Wait, stop right there, Jake said, closing his eyes tightly and holding up both hands. Zara, please put the shirt back on immediately. She paused with the jersey halfway over her head, looking confused. Am I performing the ceremony incorrectly? My research clearly indicated that garment removal was the essential first step in human appreciation rituals. Your research was completely wrong, Jake said firmly, still keeping his eyes closed. Very, very wrong about everything. Zara pulled the shirt back down and Jake could hear the confusion and maybe hurt feelings in her voice. Then how do humans properly express gratitude for sacred life debts? What is the correct procedure? Jake finally opened his eyes, making absolutely sure she was fully clothed again. We say thank you. Sometimes we give small gifts or do favors. We definitely don't do what you were about to do. But the websites clearly stated that physical intimacy was... The websites lied to you, Jake interrupted. Zara, what you were about to do is something humans only do with people they love deeply. It's not about paying debts or saying thank you. It's about feelings and emotions and caring about someone in a very special way. Zara sat down heavily on his couch, looking more confused than he'd ever seen her. Your species is incredibly complicated. Tell me about it, Jake said, sinking into his favorite chair. But Zara, I need you to understand something important. You don't owe me anything at all. I helped you because I wanted to help, not because I expected anything in return. Before Zara could respond to this revelation, someone started pounding aggressively on his front door. Jake Morrison, you open this door right now. Carol's voice came through loud and clear, filled with determination. I know you're in there and I know you're hiding something important from me. Jake looked at Zara, who was still wearing his football jersey and oven mitts while sitting in a room full of floating alien lights and impossible flowers. This situation was about to become much, much worse. Carol burst through the door before Jake could stop her, and immediately froze like someone had hit a pause button on her entire body. Her eyes went wide as she took in the floating lights, the color-changing flowers, and Zara sitting on the couch in a football jersey and oven mitts like this was the most normal thing in the world. What in the name of all that's holy is going on in here? Carol whispered, her voice barely audible. Zara stood up with perfect politeness like she was meeting someone at a church social. You must be Carol. Jake has mentioned you several times during our conversations. I am Zara, and I apologize for the unusual circumstances of our first meeting. Jake, who is this woman? And why does your living room look like something out of a science fiction movie? Jake's mind raced desperately for an explanation that wouldn't make him sound completely insane. Carol, this is my cousin. From Canada. She's really into special effects and theater stuff. Special effects? Carol walked over to one of the floating lights and waved her hand all around it. Jake, this thing isn't connected to anything. It's actually floating in midair like it's defying gravity. Zara looked at Jake with obvious confusion. Should I not have mentioned that I am from the Andromedan Collective? Canada, Jake said quickly, his voice cracking slightly. She's from the Canadian Collective. It's like a theater group that does experimental performances. Carol turned to stare at him with the look she used to give him when he forgot to take out the trash. Jake Morrison, I've known you since we were 15 years old. And you have never once mentioned having a cousin who looks like she stepped out of a fairy tale and can make lights float around without any wires or electricity. Before Jake could come up with another terrible lie. The situation took a turn for the much worse. A low humming sound filled the air, like a giant bee was hovering somewhere nearby. Through the window, they could all see several black cars pulling up outside his trailer. Men in dark suits got out carrying equipment that looked way too advanced for any government agency Jake had ever heard of. Oh no, Zara said, and for the first time since Jake had met her, genuine fear filled her voice. They have found me. Who has found you? Carol demanded, looking back and forth between them. Your planetary defense forces, Zara said, peeking carefully through the window blinds. My ship's destruction must have triggered their automatic detection systems. One of the men outside was pointing some kind of device directly at Jake's trailer, and it was making rapid beeping sounds that got faster and faster. Jake, Carol said slowly, her voice getting very quiet. Your cousin isn't really from Canada, is she? Not exactly, Jake admitted, knowing there was no point in lying anymore. Where is she actually from, Jake? Jake looked at Zara, who nodded like she was giving him permission to tell the complete truth. Space, he said quietly. Outer space. Like really far away outer space. Carol sat down heavily in his kitchen chair. Space? You mean like outer space with stars and planets and aliens? About 2 million light years away. To be precise, Zara added helpfully. The men outside were moving closer to the trailer with purpose. Jake could hear radio chatter and the sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel. "We need to get out of here right now," Jake said urgently. "Like immediately. Where are we supposed to go?" Carol asked, still looking shocked. "And why exactly are we running from government agents?" Zara was already moving around the room, gathering up some kind of small device she'd apparently been working on during her stay. "If they capture me, they will dissect me to learn about my technology and my people. If they capture you, they will interrogate you extensively about your contact with me. Neither of these scenarios is acceptable to me." Jake grabbed his truck keys from the kitchen counter. "Back door? Right now. Move fast." They slipped out the rear of the trailer just as the front door exploded inward with a loud crash. Jake led them quickly through the desert scrub toward an old mining cave his grandfather had shown him many years ago. Behind them, they could hear men shouting orders and the sound of his trailer being systematically torn apart. "I am deeply sorry about this," Zara said as they climbed into the dark cave. "This entire situation is my fault. I should have been more careful about concealing my presence on your world." "It's not your fault at all," Jake said firmly. "Those guys would have found you eventually, no matter what you did." Carol was sitting on a large rock staring at both of them like they'd lost their minds. "Okay, I need the complete story right now. No more lies, no more cover stories. I want the truth about everything." So Jake told her the whole story from the beginning. The crash in the desert, finding Zara unconscious, the cultural misunderstanding about life debts and everything that had happened since that night. Carol listened without interrupting once, though her eyes got progressively wider as the story continued. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said when he finished. "You rescued an actual alien from outer space. She thinks she owes you her entire life, and she tried to thank you by doing what aliens think humans do when they're grateful to each other." "That's pretty much the whole story," Jake confirmed. Carol looked directly at Zara. "And you learned about human culture from the internet?" Zara nodded seriously. "I realize now that my research methods were severely flawed and led to incorrect conclusions." "Oh, honey," Carol said, and for the first time since this whole mess started, she was actually smiling. "The internet is absolutely the last place you want to learn about how real people actually behave in the real world." Outside the cave, they could hear helicopters circling overhead. The search was getting more organized and intensive. "I need to contact my people as soon as possible," Zara said. "But my communication device was damaged in the crash. I've been trying to repair it with available materials, but I need specific components that aren't readily available on your world." "What kind of components?" Jake asked. Zara pulled out the device she'd been carrying. It looked like a beautiful crystal wrapped in delicate metal wires. "Crystallized silicon with a very specific atomic structure that must be grown under precise conditions. Your planet has all the raw materials, but they need to be processed in a way your current technology cannot achieve." Carol was examining the device with obvious interest. "You know, my brother Danny works at the University Materials Lab. They have really advanced equipment for growing silicon crystals, high-tech stuff they use for computer research. Could he help us?" Jake asked hopefully. "Maybe. But we'd have to get there without being caught by whoever those people were." Zara looked thoughtful for a moment. "There is another possibility. I could modify your vehicle to avoid their detection systems temporarily, but it would require significant changes to its basic structure." "What kind of changes?" Jake was almost afraid to ask. "Nothing that would be permanent," Zara assured him quickly. "But your truck would need to achieve atmospheric flight capability." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "You want to make my truck fly?" "Just until we reach the university safely. I can remove all modifications afterward without any damage." Carol started laughing, a sound that was half hysteria and half pure amazement. "A flying pickup truck. This day just keeps getting more and more unbelievable." Through the cave entrance, they could see searchlights sweeping methodically across the desert landscape. Time was definitely running out. "If we're going to do this crazy thing," Jake said, "we need to do it right now." Zara nodded and pulled out another device from her pocket. "The modifications will take approximately 10 minutes to complete." "Can you distract them for that long?" Jake looked at Carol, who was already nodding with determination. "I have an idea," she said, "but you're really not going to like it very much." As it turned out, Carol's plan involved her walking boldly up to the government agents and telling them she'd seen strange lights and unusual activity near the old highway, about 5 miles in completely the wrong direction. While she led them on what she hoped would be a long, wild goose chase, Jake and Zara worked frantically on his truck. Watching Zara modify his vehicle was like witnessing actual magic happen before his eyes. She attached small glowing devices to each wheel, ran some kind of energy conductor along the entire frame, and did things to his engine that he was pretty sure violated several fundamental laws of physics. "There," she said, wiping her hands on an old rag. "Your vehicle can now achieve limited atmospheric flight capability. All modifications will dissolve harmlessly within 24 hours. Jake looked at his beat-up pickup truck, which now had a faint blue glow around all the edges, and was hovering about 2 inches off the ground like it weighed nothing at all. "This is either the coolest thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life," he said slowly, "or the absolute craziest. Perhaps it is both," Zara said with what might have been the first real smile he'd seen from her. Carol came running back just as the truck lifted smoothly off the ground. She stopped and stared in complete amazement as Jake's old pickup truck rose into the night sky like something straight out of a science fiction movie. "Well," she said, climbing carefully into the passenger seat, "this is definitely going to be one interesting story to tell people someday." Jake nearly crashed the flying truck into a large cactus. The flight to the university took 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours to Jake. He'd never been particularly afraid of heights, but driving a pickup truck through the air was completely different from flying in a commercial airplane. Every time the wind caught them, the truck wobbled dangerously, and he was absolutely certain they were all going to end up as a smoking crater somewhere in the desert. "You're doing perfectly fine," Zara said calmly from the middle seat. "The stabilization systems are automatically compensating for all atmospheric turbulence." "I honestly can't believe this is my life right now," Carol said, looking out at the lights of their small town spread out far below them. "Yesterday my biggest worry was whether I should ask Jake if we wanted to try dating again. Now I'm flying through the sky in a pickup truck with an actual alien from outer space." Jake nearly lost control of the truck again. "You were thinking about us trying to date again?" "Focus on the flying, Romeo," Carol said, but she was definitely smiling when she said it. They landed gently behind the university science building, just as the sun was starting to come up over the horizon. Zara's modifications dissolved exactly like she'd promised, leaving Jake's truck looking perfectly normal except for a faint, lingering smell of ozone in the air. Carol's brother Danny was a graduate student who worked night shifts in the materials lab to help pay for his education. When they found him, he was hunched over a computer screen, analyzing complex crystal structures for his doctoral thesis. "Carol, what are you doing here at 6 o'clock in the morning?" "Danny, I need you to do something for me. And I need you to not ask any questions until after you've completely finished doing it." Danny looked carefully at Jake and Zara, taking in Zara's unusual appearance and the strange glowing device she was carrying in her hands. "Does this have something to do with those government helicopters that have been flying around town all night long?" "It might," Carol said honestly. "Can you help us or not?" It took Danny 3 careful hours to grow the precise crystal structure that Zara needed, but he managed to do it perfectly. While they waited, Zara explained more about her people and the real reason she'd come to Earth in the first place. "We are explorers and researchers," she said. "We travel from world to world throughout the galaxy, studying different forms of life and culture. I was supposed to observe your planet from a safe distance in orbit and report back to my superiors, but my ship malfunctioned during the approach." "So what happens now?" Jake asked. "Do you just go back home like none of this ever happened?" Zara looked at the repaired communication device glowing softly in her hands. "I will send a signal to my fleet and they will come to retrieve me within a few days. But first I want to tell you something important that I learned during my time here with you." She looked at both Jake and Carol with those strange, beautiful eyes that seemed to hold tiny stars. "My people don't understand friendship the way humans do. We have alliances, partnerships, and mutual benefit agreements for practical purposes. But the idea of helping someone simply because it's the right thing to do, with no expectation of reward or payment, this concept is completely new to us." "It really shouldn't be that unusual," Jake said. "But it is unusual, at least among the species we've encountered before. When you saved me from my destroyed ship, you created what my people would call a sacred life debt. But you also did something else that was far more important. You showed me what it truly means to care about someone you barely know, just because they needed help and you were able to provide it." Zara activated her communication device, and it began to glow with a soft pulsing light that seemed to reach toward the stars. I'm going to tell my people about friendship, about kindness given freely without expectation, about humans who help stranded aliens in the desert just because it's the decent thing to do. The device hummed softly as it sent its signal across the vast distances between star systems. How long until they arrive? Carol asked. 3 of your days, Zara replied. But I want to spend that time learning more about real human culture. The actual culture, not what I can find on your internet. Jake laughed out loud. I think we can definitely manage that. Over the next 3 days, they showed Zara around their small town like she was a visiting relative. She tried pizza for the first time and declared it a perfect food that combined all necessary nutrients in an ideal ratio. She watched a baseball game at the local high school and spent an entire hour trying to understand why humans would create a recreational activity with such complex and seemingly arbitrary rules. She helped Jake fix cars at his garage, and her advanced knowledge of mechanical systems made repairs that should have taken hours happen in just minutes. Jake and Carol had many long talks during those 3 days too. About trust and honesty, about taking chances on people, about how sometimes the very best things in life come from the most completely unexpected places. On the 3rd evening, Zara's rescue ship arrived silently in the same patch of desert where Jake had first found her. It was much larger than her scout craft had been, and it settled to the ground without making any sound at all. 2 more beings like Zara emerged from the ship. They greeted her with formal ceremony, then looked at Jake and Carol with obvious curiosity and respect. These are the humans I told you about in my reports, Zara said in English, apparently for their benefit. Jake Morrison saved my life, and Carol Peterson taught me about the true meaning of human friendship. The other aliens bowed politely to them, and one spoke to Zara in their musical language. Commander Vec says he is deeply honored to meet representatives of such a fascinating species, Zara translated. He also says the High Council is extremely curious about this concept of friendship that you have taught me. Before she left with her people, Zara gave Jake a small device that looked like a captured star made of crystal. This will allow us to communicate across the vast distances between our worlds, she explained. I want to continue learning about friendship, and I believe my people could benefit greatly from understanding your ways. Will we ever see you again? Carol asked. Zara smiled, and it was the most genuinely human expression Jake had ever seen on her beautiful face. Count on it. After all, that's what friends are for, isn't it? As her ship lifted silently into the night sky and disappeared among the stars, Jake put his arm around Carol's shoulders and pulled her close. So, he said softly, want to grab dinner sometime? I know this great pizza place that serves perfect food. Carol laughed and leaned against him. After flying trucks and alien rescue missions, a completely normal date sounds absolutely perfect. 6 months later, Jake received his first interstellar message from Zara. She told him that the concept of friendship had caused quite a stir among the Andromedan collective. Several worlds had requested visits from human cultural ambassadors, and there was serious talk of establishing formal diplomatic relations between their species. She also mentioned that she'd been promoted to cultural research specialist, with a focus specifically on the study of human social customs and relationships. I told them, she wrote in her message, that sometimes the most valuable things in the universe can't be repaid or measured or put into debt columns. They're just gifts that friends give to each other freely and happily. Jake looked up at the stars that night and smiled widely. Sometimes the very best things in life really did come from the most unexpected crashes in the desert.